So we're hearing more from some of the officers who defended the Capitol. D.C. police officer Daniel Hodges, who was crushed in a door by rioters, says this.
If it wasn't my job, I would have done that for free. You know, it was absolutely my pleasure to crush a white nationalist insurrection. And I'm glad I was in a position to be able to help. So we'll do it as many times as it takes.
Officer Hodges, I want to tell you how much that means to me and how many people need to hear that. So thank you very much. And prosecutors are saying today there are 275 open investigations of subjects involved in the Capitol insurrection, and that number is only going to grow as more of the rioters are identified. It's part of the Herculean effort facing law enforcement as they try to bring rioters to justice and prevent any more attacks as the inauguration gets closer. So how is law enforcement finding these individuals as extremist groups move deeper online? Time to discuss with CNN reporter Donnie O'Sullivan and Chloe Colliver, the head of digital policy and strategy at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. So good to have both of you on this evening. Chloe, I'm going to start with you. Right now we are living with insurrectionists among us, and we can expect, I should say, these people will change their minds after Donald Trump leaves office next week. How do we walk people back from the ledge, really, and de-radicalize them after the president and his allies have convinced so many that this election was illegitimate?
Well, first off, de-radicalization is a resource-intensive and long-term project. So we need to acknowledge, for the first time, really, for policymakers in the US in recent years, the real severity of this problem of radicalization to the extreme right wing, and what that means both online, offline, and the ramifications for violence and harmful activity. So we need to first take that step before we can start to understand what programming, what practices need to take place to draw some of these people out of the extremist ecosystems that they have been taken into over the past few years. Some of that de-radicalization can take place through peer networks, trusted, credible messengers who try to sow a seed of doubt in some of the disinformation and propaganda that these people have been consuming for years now on social media platforms and elsewhere. And it also takes a policy response from government to really put the programming in place to recognize these problems and address them from a local level.
Donnie, now that social media companies are cracking down on some of the most dangerous elements, right? They've begun organizing in the dark. How does that complicate the job of law enforcement? Does it complicate? Does it help?
Yeah, it makes it tougher, Don. And, you know, I've been speaking to people at these social media platforms who work in this area, and one of them compared to what they've done over the past week against QAnon as to what they did with ISIS a few years ago in terms of a total wipeout of thousands of these accounts. You know, in just a few days last week, they knocked out 70,000 QAnon accounts on Twitter. So what happens then is you're forcing a lot of these groups underground, and it's sort of like the physical world equivalent of organizing a rally through public meetings and sticking up flyers to having secret meetings in basements. They have no doubt, what Facebook and Twitter has done have undoubtedly disrupted the organization capabilities of these groups, but they forced them into darker corners of the internet. And just as it's harder for us to see what is now being said, it is harder for law enforcement too. So there is a potential path that we might see more folks as they go into these darker places online, getting more radicalized.
Chloe, I understand that you've been monitoring online extremism for the last 10 years and say that you're seeing a lot of chatter online about the 17th and Inauguration Day. Can you tell us what that chatter is exactly?
Yes, that's correct. We've been watching these movements in the larger platforms, but also these smaller, darker spaces that Donnie has just mentioned as well for a number of years. The chatter around the week to come is a lot more confused than what we saw before the 6th of January. So it's a little hard to predict exactly what that will mean for real world events. And we've certainly seen increased fear or uncertainty around calling explicitly for violent activity in the way that we saw it openly done on platforms across the internet before the 6th of January. But we are seeing continued calls for violence, the promotion of specific events, not only in Washington, D.C., but across cities in the US. So we're keeping a very close eye on various strands of the extremist ecosystem that have been involved in that planning, whether it's conspiracy networks like QAnon, but also white supremacists, militia groups, and the kind of looser collaborative groups that we've seen move from platforms like Facebook and Twitter for the most part over to Telegram, to Parler, to Gab, and others.
Doni, quickly before I have to go, Facebook today imposing special restrictions ahead of the inauguration. You have new reporting about how Stop the Steal groups are hiding in plain sight on Facebook. What are you learning about that?
Yeah, I mean, there is a crackdown, as we mentioned, but look, the basis of what we saw last week here in Washington was built on a foundation of misinformation. And you can still very easily find these lies about the election on these social media platforms. And the groups like Stop the Steal are adapting. We saw today groups just making slight changes in their names on Facebook to evade detection and to live on. So the misinformation is still proliferating online. And I'm afraid, Don, that once this week passes and maybe there is less of a spotlight on these social media companies, they might take the foot off the gas a bit and not be as tough on misinformation as hate as they have been in the past 7 days.
Yeah, well, we'll know in the next week, Doni and Chloe. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Joe Biden.